Order. Torquil Crichton to move the motion.
Tap alive. Ms Vaz, Madam Speaker, thank you. It's an honour to have you in the chair. And thank you all colleagues for your attendance and support in what I'm sure will be an illuminating 90-minute debates. Staging your first Westminster Hall debate is a bit like throwing a birthday party and wondering if anyone will turn up. At least we know there's not a depopulation crisis in Westminster. So thank you all. And thank you, Minister, for taking this debate. It may not seem obvious at first what the demographics of the Western Isles have to do with the Home Office, but if you bear with me, I'll explain and expand on why this issue that affects the periphery of the UK now influences the entire economy and should inform the decisions that we make at a national level on immigration. First, for some context, in Nahill and Nier in the Western Isles, we are in the middle of a depopulation crisis, and I am here to sound that alarm. We're painfully aware of what is a rapidly changing population. An older, strongly Gaelic-speaking demographic is passing on, and we see the rapid out-migration of younger, economically active families. And they face insurmountable challenges sometimes, being priced out of housing, facing failing transport connections, stuttering health provision, childcare, and a host of other issues which weigh heavily in the scales of deciding whether to stay or go. And while we sound the warnings at home, I think the lights should be flashing on the dashboard in this place too, and in offices across Whitehall. And that's the reason I'm staging this debate, to highlight that we are simply running out of people to take up key public sector and private sector posts to keep our islands going. And that affects the viability of vital services, and it ill serves the local economy and the national one too. Just to give some context, the estimated population of the Western Isles is 26,200. That's a 5.5% decrease since the 2011 census, and it's the highest percentage decrease in Scotland. And according to estimates from the Western Isles Health Board, who have an obvious interest in this from a staffing and care point of view, the working age population of the islands is set to decrease by 6% by 2028, while the over 75 population, with the highest levels of comorbidity, who have one or more illness, is set to rise by 25%. It's quite frightening, really. These population changes, according to the board, will result in a year-on-year reduction in the available workforce, in nurses, care staff, to attend the most important, the most vulnerable people, and ultimately the ability to sustain services. And I say we have to address this with local responses, Scottish responses, and action at a UK level to prevent the situation entering this downward spiral. And I know that an ageing population pattern is part of a European-wide trend, and somehow we kid ourselves that this is a kind of over-the-horizon event, which we will deal with later. But for us in the islands, it's an urgent reality, and our breakfast will become everyone else's lunch if we don't address these issues on the edge of Europe. They will become structural problems for the rest of the country and the rest of the continent. Now, more than worrying about an ageing population, I worry about the exodus of a working population, and particularly the female population. Since 2007, the number of women aged between 25 and 44 on the islands has dropped 15%, down from 3,289 down to 2,787. And there are many reasons for this rapid decline, but for most parents, they can be encapsulated in one word: childcare. Of course, this is a challenge for parents everywhere, but the lack of a working age population, as well as the burdensome regulation, has strangled childcare in the islands, and I'm sure that's the experience of colleagues across the board. Working parents, and primarily working mothers, of course, find it hard to return to work, to balance childcare and careers, and despite the very strong family connections and networks they have in the islands, ultimately they give up in frustration, and ultimately they speak to me, as they have spoken to me over the election campaign, about giving up and moving to the mainland. And when we lose families, we lose the working age population. During the election campaign, the successful election campaign, I have to say, I was joined by the Shadow Business Secretary, now in office as the Business Secretary, in a visit around some of the key ports in Stornoway. And we went to a shellfish export company, very successful, £4 million turnover and rising, a great investment by the port and by the parent company in the local fishing fleet. But the actual processing of the product in the chill room and the packing room would not be able to operate were it not for the Ukraine war. Most of the staff that packed these products were refugees from that conflict. They're welcome, they're a valuable addition to the workforce and to the islands, but we can't have our economic growth dependent on a conflict on the other side of Europe. At another seafood processor, on another island, a 3 million business at the end of a single track road, there were sustainable stocks and sustainable work for perhaps 30 employees, but only 15 workers available because they can't be found locally because there are simply no workers. This was an operation which, pre-Brexit, had a large and well-integrated European workforce. Now it can't find a local workforce, and the regulation and bureaucratic challenge of sourcing staff is almost overwhelming. And in the fishing industry too, offshore, the present immigration requirements, as I understand them, require staff employed under the sponsored visa scheme to pass stage 4 English language tests. Now that's quite a high bar, quite a high academic bar for an industry that seeks crewmen who are primarily experienced in working in noisy and challenging conditions where hand signals are often as useful as linguistic ones. I will, yes, thank you.
I'm grateful to the volunteering way because this is a matter in which a number of us have campaigned over the years, as he will be aware. The problem is essentially that the definition of what constitutes a skilled migrant worker is a very narrow one and brings in skills such as the English language test, which are really not central to the jobs that these people are going to be doing. We've had migrant workers working in the catching sector for years safely without that level of English language. Will he join with me and others, no doubt, in encouraging the new Home Office team to have yet another look at this and this time take these issues seriously?
I agree entirely with the member for Orkney and Shetland, and that language requirement is just one aspect of the present visa system that's unsuitable for the fishing industry and the islands and rural economies, which until now we've been unable to navigate around, but hopefully will undergo a fresh review with a new Home Office team. And this new Home Office team and immigration policy is rightly the reserve of the UK government. I do not seek to break up control of the system. I agree, and I stood on a platform for a properly managed, points-based immigration system that links up the needs of the workforce, the economy and the country. But I do want to counter this narrative, which was this summer in danger of becoming the prevailing narrative, that this country is somehow full up. There are parts of the UK, parts of Scotland, where we are crying out for skilled workers to come and be part of our workforce and to stay and become part of our communities. And Scotland has specific needs for our skills base, and the islands and rural areas of Scotland and the UK have some very specific asks of their own. And the lesson of policy in almost every area, not just immigration, be it administered from here or from Holyrood, is that one size does not fit all. What works at a UK level may need more flexibility at a Scottish level and again at a rural and island level. And in the past, the UK government, in other guises, has worked with the Scottish government to show flexibility. The former First Minister, Jack McConnell, now Baron McConnell of Glen Scorodale, he promoted the Fresh Talent Initiative for post-study work visas for overseas students at Scottish universities, enabling them to stay on for a period. There is and there should be interest in reviving that plan, and the idea of rural visa projects, which were, as I understand it, quite advanced by the Scottish Government with a Migration Advisory Committee before the previous UK Government stamped on the idea. Now, there are many levers of government which are not at the hand of this Minister, but which do bear mentioning because they're part of local and Scottish solutions to rural depopulation. We're lucky in the islands that we have a system of crofting tenure, a uniquely Scottish system which has kept generations in their home communities. But crofting has been hollowed out by political forces which neither understand nor value its worth. Crofting tenure, properly regulated, should be a defence against the property market, but instead it's become an enabler and it's become a critical factor the sale of croft tenancies at inflated rates has become a critical factor in the housing shortage. And crofting needs urgent reform. And I commend the Shucksmith report on the future of crofting, now over a decade old, but an excellent piece of work which sought to rebalance, rebalance or restore the balance between the crofter's right of security of tenure and the responsibilities which would keep the market at bay. It should be dusted down and reenacted, but that's probably a subject for another debate and another place. But the lack of affordable housing is an issue which many other members here and elsewhere will recognise, and hope one that will be taken up as part of the debate, the remaining time in the debate, because we know it's impossible in many of our areas for anyone with modest means to secure a house, which is part of a pretty basic precondition for retaining a working age population and keeping the economy spinning. So we need action on housing, we need action on crofting regulation, we need access on land, we need access and action on depopulation. As I said, the dashboard lights are flashing. And more than anything, we need focus. We need economic focus on the peripheries of the north and west of Scotland, these areas of continuing depopulation. We need economic incentives, state aid, perhaps a reduction in VAT on construction and enhanced capital allowances. Now, I know, again, I don't want the Minister to worry too much about these issues because they are for the Treasury and for other departments, and I will take them up with them. I don't want to end, and I realise my time is running, I don't want to end on a note of despondency. There is hope. There is hope in community ownership of the many crofting estates in the Western Isles, a quiet revolution which has injected not just a new wave of development, but a growing sense of confidence and assurance that, given the tools, we can tackle these issues for ourselves. And there is the opportunity, the vast opportunity, that community ownership and community share of the wealth of wind in onshore and offshore developments which are due offers. And this change is so tantalisingly close and could be so transformative in terms of finance and confidence that it cannot be ignored as part of the UK government's GB energy strategy. And there's hope in the individuals and the families and the communities and their resilience, which make the islands not just a great place to visit, but a precious place to stay. There are examples of local initiatives like the Youth Repopulation Zone, which has been providing training opportunities and childcare provision, that much hallowed childcare provision to parents. It's led by Cúil Níl and Shear. It's received 60,000 from the Scottish Government, and I commend the work of that project and the work of many other individuals and communities who focus themselves on the issue of depopulation at a local level. And as I said, we have a sense of urgency about this in the islands. We are experiencing a depopulation crisis, and I hope now that that can find an echo not just in the contributions to this debate today, but in the UK Government's awareness and response to the issue. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I expect to take the Lib Dem opposition spokesperson at 3:28. The question is that this House has considered depopulation in rural areas. Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you very much, Baz. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Nahelan and the Year on securing this debate, an issue which is as important to me and my communities as it is to him and his. The yardstick by which I have for many years now measured any proposal for anything to happen in the Northern Isles is to ask a simple question: will this make it more or less likely for people to want to live here? Because without a healthy and growing population, then you risk losing the critical mass, and within the critical mass you don't have the mix. So every population, every community needs to have the mix of the professional, the technical, the skilled, the semi-skilled, the unskilled. And in a city where there is that mobility within the different districts, then you can take that sort of thing for granted. When you live in an island community, it's a very different story. In some ways, actually, I am the living, breathing example of how depopulation happens. I was born and brought up on Isla. I left Isla as a 17-year-old to go to university. I eventually qualified as a solicitor. Isla has a population of between 3,500 and 3,500. It would not have been possible for me to return to Isla to go into legal practice with a population of that sort. Now, in fact, I've lived most of my adult life in Orkney, where we have a population of around about 22,000. And 22,000 is big enough to sustain that professional community, the legal firms, the accountancy firms, the wider range of doctors, the bigger hospital, and these are things which allow you to maintain that mix so that you can keep your community functioning properly. The history of Orkney and Shetland is slightly different to that of the Western Isles. Our population, though, in Shetland was down to about 16,000 until the mid-1970s, at which point the oil industry came. And since then, the population grew quite rapidly, and it has continued to rest somewhere around about 22,000, 23,000. So, you know, what does that tell us? It tells us that actually the critical thing in order to grow your population is the availability of a good mix of well-paid and varied jobs in your local economy. And now, as 40, 50 years later, we enter the decline of oil and gas as part of our economy, the just transition matters for us more than anywhere else, because if we see opportunities for our community in the development of marine renewables, for example, the development of tidal power, tidal stream generation. But if we push oil and gas off the end of a cliff before these technologies are mature enough to come on stream, then people are not going to hang around in a place like Orkney or Shetland waiting for something else like that to happen. They have a history and a legitimate expectation of working in good, well-paid jobs, and they will take their skills and they will go elsewhere. The Honourable Gentleman referred to housing as an important, and I would say that housing is probably the biggest single constraint that we have in economic growth in the Northern Isles. I had a really interesting conversation recently with the Chief Executive of Yatland Housing Association in Shetland, who was talking about a proposal that he had put to a significant contractor who was going to be employing a significant number of people for a good number of years. And he said, essentially, if they pay the rent to us in advance, and this is a big corporate, so they were rich enough to do it, pay the rent for us in advance, we will build the houses, and then at the end of the time, the housing stock reverts to us and it is available for other use within our community. A brilliant idea, absolutely fantastic. It's, not least in its simplicity. It was something I think the corporate themselves would be up for, but it was something that was not seen with favour by government in Edinburgh, and it has subsequently been discouraged. That sort of creativity, coming up with solutions to problems that are appropriate to the community, is absolutely critical if we are going to halt the reverse. The infrastructure that is available for people in island communities is also absolutely essential. Be it the digital infrastructure, modern broadband, the availability of mobile phone coverage, and the problems that could be faced by communities such as mine when copper wire switch-off happens for landline technologies. But there's other infrastructures as well, the physical infrastructure of a ferry service. The Honourable Gentleman from Nahalin in the Near doesn't need to be told by me what problems come from a lack of a reliable ferry service, because his constituents have endured it. But even within Shetland and increasingly within Orkney as well, the internal ferry services have been problematic as fleets get older and need to be replaced. Again, listening to the community. The communities in Unskiel, Whalsa, Bressa are all keen to say, actually, for the next generation, we don't want to be reliant on ferries. We want the construction of fixed links. We want to see tunnels, which will then be available to offer us opportunities to build and to grow businesses. I spoke to one woman in Yell who told me recently she would love to go back and have her home in Yell. She was born and brought up in Ulster originally, but she has two children who have a medical condition that means that she doesn't want to take the risk of having to rely on a ferry journey possibly in the middle of the night, should her children need to get hospital medical attention. So somebody who would like to live in Yale or Unstatually is forced into living on the Shetland mainland. So the problems of population decline for Shetland as a whole, if you look at the headline figures, may not be as acute, but within Shetland, the smaller island communities are continuing to see that decline. It is about giving every community the empowerment to come up with the solutions that are appropriate to them in their communities. Ms Vaz, I know that others want to speak. There's a lot more that I could say about this, and I hope that we will return to it at some point in the future.
Pleasure to serve under your chairing this afternoon. Can I warmly congratulate the member for Aneeligan and Ya for introducing this debate in the eloquent way in which he did. He said it was like coming to a birthday party. The only problem is he didn't think to bring any cake for all of us who were attending here today. Depopulation in rural areas is, of course, a live and pressing issue, and I think that the honourable member captured most of the real issues that we constantly live with in rural areas right across Scotland. In the Scottish Affairs Committee in the last Parliament, this was an issue that we took very seriously. We produced 2 reports on this very subject, one about Scotland's population and demography, where the range of issues that the honourable gentleman presented was something that came up regularly in our proceedings. And just before the dissolution of the last Parliament, we concluded a report in the cost of living crisis in rural areas, which was very gratefully received, I think, by a number of people who were looking at this as a means to try and address some of the issues, again, that the honourable gentleman raised. But we know our problem. We've known it for a while. Scotland is facing population decline. We are the only part of the United Kingdom that's projected to have a population decline. By 2033, our population is going to start to go down again. This is after making a bit of progress in the last 20 years, and I think it's something that everybody's welcome. Our population is a steady decline, but most of that was down to people coming to Scotland from Eastern Europe, which has, I think, boosted so many of our communities. And I think the honourable gentleman was right to reference the contribution that so many people under freedom of movement made to our communities right across Scotland. And it's an absolute disaster and tragedy that we have lost this ability to get that type of immigration going because of this refusal to review the disastrous consequences of leaving the European Union, but particularly the opportunities of freedom of movement has left us. In Scotland, we have a falling birth rate. We have an increasingly ageing population, and the issues following Brexit, of course, have created their own particular difficult issues. We have acute labour shortages in all sectors, whether that's our NHS, our care sector, our hospitality, our tourism, our agriculture, and this is even more pronounced in Scotland's rural areas. The declining population makes it harder to fill the vacancies that are available, and even if every school leaver opted to work in Scotland's social care sector, there would still be vacancies left for people to fill. Such is the scale and of the difficulties that we have. Now, I'm not sure what Labour's new policy is when it comes to immigration. I've listened very carefully to the Home Secretary when she spoke about this in debates, and I've followed what the Prime Minister's been saying, but I'm still not sure what Labour is trying to achieve. I think that they understand and respect and get the problem. It's just that they're not prepared to do anything about it. We're still hearing the same old language that immigration is a burden. Asylum seekers are to be demonised. No clear and concise routes to UK citizenship are being offered and opened up to people who hope to come to our shores. And I think Labour really has to do better in this. They have to acknowledge the value of immigration. For goodness sake, look what it has done to our communities. Look how it has driven economic growth. I was here when Tony Blair opened up that route to come to the UK, to the accession nations. It was a massive success. And if anything, it contributed to the economic growth that we got in the late 2000s before the economic crash. Such was the vision of the previous Labour government. Please show us some of that same vision too. And the honourable gentleman is quite right to reference the Fresh Talent Scheme. That was a fantastic innovation delivered by a Labour government in partnership with a Labour Liberal executive in Scotland. What Fresh Talent did was give us some sort of advantages over the rest of the United Kingdom. It allowed us to retain and to keep Scottish-educated foreign national students to stay and consider Scotland to be a home. If only we could see that type of imagination being deployed once again. But even an introduction like someone like Fresh Talent would barely touch the sides of our issues and difficulties that we have just now. Now, there's a general consensus, I think, amongst all the political parties in Scotland, and a consensus across Holyrood that something needs to be done, that we need to address this. This is a priority. And I know that, again, the honourable gentleman referenced some of the things that have been done by the Scottish Government, which are welcome. But the one thing that we need, and I cannot for the life of me understand why this hasn't been seriously looked at, is a Scottish visa. We need to look at the real possibility and option of having a subnational immigration system that caters for the nations and regions throughout the whole of the United Kingdom, where areas such as the Honourable Gentleman's constituency and other constituencies around Scotland can get the immigrants that they require through a system that allows them to do it. It works in other nations perfectly and effectively. The Scottish Affairs Committee visited Quebec in the last year. We saw it working perfectly there. Quebec have an arrangement with France. It is able to recruit people who are required in shortage areas. And what has happened is that Montreal is now one of the fastest growing cities and economies in the whole of North America. Imagine having just a bit of that in Scotland. Now, I was immensely encouraged throughout the general election campaign when I heard Labour talk about a Scottish visa. I listened very carefully to Labour's deputy leader, Jackie Baillie, talk about this in such a glowing way. And I spoke to businesses and sectors of my constituency who really appreciated this and thought maybe at last we'll be able to make some sort of progress. But it's all gone. What's happened to it? What happened to this idea? Now all that Labour talk about is tinkering with the migration occupation list. Yes, that'll help, but it won't do anything to address some of our real needs and our real intentions. So we need some sort of serious solutions when it comes to sort of this. And I know people tell us that we need to make sure we get more people from the United Kingdom to come to Scotland. I remember being lectured by previous Conservatives, Scottish members of Parliament, that people won't come from the rest of the United Kingdom to Scotland. Apparently they were put off by our lower council tax, free prescriptions, free childcare, free tuition fees. Apparently that was a disincentive to immigrants from Eastern Europe or further afield. And what they actually said was that people refused to come to Scotland because they would pay a few pounds more in tax. Absolute and utter rubbish. And we now know that because we've seen the latest figures from the National Records of Scotland, which shows that there's net migration to Scotland from the rest of the United Kingdom. Yes, we need to do more, but let's get away with that nonsense. I hope we don't hear anything like that from this Labour government. Yes, there's problems. Yes, there is real difficulties. Rural Scotland is suffering because of this. But it's now in the hands of a Labour government. It's not the Conservatives anymore with their cultural resistance to things like immigration. Labour have the opportunity to respond with their values. Please, for goodness sake, for the Honourable Gentleman's constituency, for all of us who represent rural constituencies here, do something about it. Get it fixed. Help us bring forward the solutions.
Lizzie Collins.
Thank you, Ms Vaz, and it's a pleasure to serve here today under your chairship. And thank you to the member for Western Isles for bringing this important debate, and I would like to associate myself with his comments on the challenges his constituents face. I rise today to address an issue that's deeply affecting rural communities across the United Kingdom, and to speak on one specific aspect that particularly affects my constituency of Morecambe and Lunesdale, because this is a matter that strikes at the heart of our villages and rural areas, where we are seeing an alarming trend. Young people, the lifeblood of our communities, are being forced to move away. One of the key reasons for this is lack of affordable housing. Today, I will speak about building homes, and tomorrow I hope to speak in this place about short-term lets and the impact they have on my constituency. In Morecambe and Lunesdale, rising house prices and chronic shortage of affordable homes are pushing young people to relocate to urban areas in search of housing they can afford. They want to stay. They want to contribute to the communities that they grew up in, but many simply can't. And what's the result? A steady drain of talent and energy from our villages. This has serious consequences, Ms Vaz. We see it most clearly in our local economy, particularly in key sectors such as agriculture and hospitality. Industries that have been the backbone of our rural life for generations. Farms, restaurants, hotels and pubs across Morecambe and Lonsdale are struggling to find the workers they need. Without young people staying in these areas or moving in, the workforce shrinks and businesses are unable to expand, or worse, survive. Let's be clear, rural depopulation is not just a social issue, it's an economic one. The lack of workers drives economic stagnation, and as businesses falter, fewer opportunities remain, fueling further depopulation. It's a vicious cycle that we must break. Ms Vaz, I believe the solution lies in providing more affordable, energy-efficient housing. By building homes that young people and families can actually afford, we can keep our communities vibrant and growing. Affordable housing doesn't just keep people in our rural areas, it attracts new investment, brings vitality back to our villages and strengthens the local economy. Moreover, we must ensure that these homes are energy efficient. In the face of both the climate crisis and soaring energy costs, it's imperative that any new housing meets high environmental standards. By doing this, we are not only addressing housing affordability, but also preparing our rural areas for a sustainable future. Now, at this point, I must mention the Loon Valley Community Land Trust, who, in collaboration with South Lakes Housing, have built beautiful, affordable, energy-efficient homes in the village of Halton in my constituency. I believe they're looking to build more in the area, and I welcome this approach, and I really urge the government to support it. Ms Vaz, if we are serious about tackling rural depopulation, then we must take decisive action. This means working closely with local authorities, developers and communities to ensure we have the right mix of affordable and social housing built to the highest standards. It means creating jobs, fostering economic growth and ensuring that young people want to and can afford to live and work in rural areas like in Morecambe and Lonsdale. So I urge the government to prioritise affordable and energy-efficient rural housing as part of its broader strategy to tackle rural depopulation and enable economic growth. Our villages and rural areas deserve nothing less. Thank you, Ms Vaz.
Shannon.
Can I say what a pleasure it is to serve under your chairship for the first time, I believe, in this term. I'm sure for the first of many, and I look forward to working along with the Honourable Lady. Can I also say what a pleasure it is to follow the Honourable Member for Morecambe and Lonsdale. She's obviously almost here as many times as I am in Westminster Hall, you know, so look forward to many more contributions from the Honourable Lady. Can I also say to the Honourable Member for Nyland and a Yar, I hope that's my Northern Ireland connection or my Northern Ireland pronunciation of that. I hope it was somewhere near to what it really should be, but it is a real pleasure for him to be here, and I'm here to make a contribution to support him. As someone who is very thankful to live in a rural community and to feel that part of the community, I speak with some personal knowledge. I come over here on a Monday and I leave on a Thursday. London will never, Madam Chair, be my home because there's too much concrete. I need green fields, I need grass, I need fresh air. That's just a personal opinion, by the way. I have nothing against the people in London. I'm sure they're very happy here, but I know I certainly couldn't be here any longer than I have to be, but that's by the way. The Northern Ireland DAERA has, and I always give a Northern Ireland perspective to these things, and I try to add some help to the debate for an appreciation. DAERA has an annual key rural issues publication. According to the 2023 DAERA publication, 36% of Northern Ireland's population lived in a rural area in 2020. The population of rural areas grew by 20% between 2001 and 2020, while the population of urban areas grew by 7%. So perhaps maybe what we're seeing in Northern Ireland is maybe a reverse of what the Honourable Gentleman is referring to. We seem to have more people coming into the rural areas, whatever those reasons may be. I can see this happening whilst I would have seen in Kirkcaldy and Grey Abbey, the two nearest villages to where I live, where people I went to school with, or the children of those I went to school with, there's most certainly many, many new faces. I know this from when I go door to door during the year on my constituency door knocks that I undertake. I just don't knock doors, Madam Chair, at the election. I'll be doing it next week in recess all those days. I did it the whole month of August and set time aside. I do it because it's a good way to hear what your constituents say. It's also good when the election was over on July the 4th, that in August and every week I was out, that people knew you were back again. So it does show an interest. But that's how you know what people want, so that's why I do that. I can also see how the footprint has expanded. I know that this is not simply due to children having children and moving to their own places, because those historic family connections are no longer in place. And in my opinion, this adds to the character and the abilities within the community. So I want to perhaps maybe very quickly refer to the community and what it means to me and what it means to the people that I live alongside. I've lived in the Irish Peninsula since I was 4 years of age. That was over 65 years ago, so now you know what age I am. And yet there are those who still consider me to be, and label me, to be a blow-in. And many times have we as rural people heard that. Oh, my goodness. There's a joke that if your great-grandparents aren't buried in Ballywalter graveyard, then you're a blow-in. So that would take you back before your birth, but that's by the way. However, this has not stopped me from being an integral part of the local community and from being proud to being known as the wee boy from Ballywalter. This is a message that people need to understand. Whilst you may be born and not be born in a rural community, you will be made a part of that community if you understand and embrace all that entails. That means farmers out ploughing or spraying fields at 1:30 a.m. because that's the best time and maybe the only time that they can do it. That means being delayed behind a tractor or a farmer moving cattle across fields across the road. And that means understanding that a bird scare may be the sound you are woken up to as a farmer protects his field. These are the things of the countryside, but these are the people, these are the things that we embrace. These are all daily parts of country life if you move into a home there. But by the same token, it also means a farmer, and I make this as well, a farmer may drop you off a bag of groceries when you're snowed in. It also means when you have a new baby, you will receive at least 10 ready-made and possibly many more ready-made meals from your local community. That's the community that I live in, and I think it's a community that we probably all live in. And I know quite certainly it's the community that the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland lives in. It means if you're delayed, there are people who will wait for your child at the school until you get there. It means you're part of that community. So for me, Madam Chair, community means just all those things. So someone new comes in, welcome them. If someone needs help, you reach out. There are things that we need to do better to encourage more people to take up rural living and to bring their skills and their qualities to rural life. We need to ensure that there's an adequate broadband for home working and small businesses, because we have to move with the times. Whatever, when people want to work from home and maybe work from their own house and have their business from their own house, we need to ensure that we encourage them and make that happen. We need to ensure that there are places in small rural schools. We need to enhance public transport connectivity. We need to encourage by any means, by all means, our banks to realise that their face-to-face obligations with rural customers comes first. I'm looking around me here. I don't think there's one of the members who were here before that hasn't spoken about bank closures, because it really sickens me, Madam Chair. Because it seems whenever the banks make more money than they did the year before, they close the banks in the rural areas. I mean, what is it about making? Forgive me for I'm not really a socialist, by the way, but just to say this, just to say that I can't comprehend how the banks can close a bank in a rural area and then produce more dividends for their chief executives. There's something seriously wrong, morally wrong with that. And if there's any banks out there, listen, remember, please take note of my words, because they aren't just the words of myself, they're the words of many others as well. We need to ensure that rural medical practices have adequate facilities for physio, for nutritionists, for sexual health clinics, dental practices, to ensure there's adequate provision for rural communities. All those things are part of what people come to live in the countryside wish to have and wish to see. And I finish with this here, Madam Chair, because I realise there's a lot of people who want to speak. There is so much to be offered living in the rural community, and there's space for more with sensible planning and forethought. There is nothing, in my opinion, like country life. And that's not because I'm a shooting man. I just love the country. But we need to protect our country life whilst encouraging people to reap the health benefits of living in the country. Fresher air, cleaner air. My goodness, who could say anything wrong with that? Thank you.
Thank you. John Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you too to my honourable friend for achieving this debate on a really most important subject. We previously were on opposite sides in the great newspaper divide. I was on the True Blue Tory supporting Daily Mail, and he was on a red rag, I think, called the Daily Record. We'll not dwell on that. Depopulation is the curse of rural areas, a blight that creeps up, strangles the lifeblood and can precipitate a crisis, after which shops and schools close, and so communities wither and die. And it's a multi-headed hydra of a problem, and we're hearing about that today. There's no one cause, and so therefore there's no one solution. There is no magic wand here. Bright lights in big cities will always have their charms. As a proud country boy myself, I think that's all overrated. But we need to make moving away from our rural area a choice and not a necessity. Some of the issues are common to rural areas right across the UK and indeed around the globe as a whole. First among them is jobs. For if you cannot find work, your choices are stark. Move, if you can, or linger where you are. And that indeed can be a miserable existence, for rural deprivation is real. And issues with connectivity, and especially public transport, can add genuine isolation to the burden. And scenery in rural areas, such as my Dumfries and Galloway constituency, is lovely. It's a delight for locals and tourists alike. Yet, you cannot eat the scenery. Another layer of difficulty, which is peculiar to Scotland, lies in the fact that we have two governments, one here in Westminster and one at Holyrood in Edinburgh. The arrival of that devolved Parliament was designed to shorten the distance between the people and the government, to deliver a light on its feet legislature able to deliver Scottish solutions to Scottish problems, such as depopulation. The theory was marvellous. The reality, perhaps less successful. Much great work has been done by MSP colleagues, but problems persist, not least when one side of the equation is not the willing partner that it ought to be. From previous experience as a special advisor in the Scotland office, I found the SNP Scottish Government was capable of foot-dragging with little interest in making joint projects with the UK Government a success. Yeah. Take the A75 road, critical to connectivity between Northern Ireland, Scotland and the rest of the UK. Carrying perhaps as much as 60% of Northern Ireland's trade, it's a sorry cattle track of a road, dubbed very often the road to hell. The UK Government earmarked money for improvements. The Scottish Government cried foul because transport is devolved. Result? No action on the road that is the very spine of my rural constituency. How do you attract young families to rural Scotland when the quality of schools is such a lottery? Why, with one so-called curriculum for excellence in Scotland, are there 32 local authority heads of education delivering that in 32 different ways? Why is there a postcode lottery when one school may offer, say, 9 exams, when one 25 miles down the road may offer 10? Regardless of pupils' ability, some are at an instant disadvantage. Housing, we're hearing a lot about that today, is a problem. You may find a job, but can you find a rural home within affordable commuting distance? Probably not. Housing sits with the Scottish Government, and we're told there will be a reset in relations between the new administration here and the one in Edinburgh. Certainly.
A matter for the UK Government. When he was Special Advisor, what did he recommend to one of his Secretaries of States about how immigration routes to Scotland could be improved?
John Cooper.
For that intervention. Our advice was that things like Scottish visa projects and things like that have a fundamental problem in that if you arrive in Scotland with a bit of paper that says you can be in Scotland, there's nothing to keep you there. And we found, again, with difficulties with the black economy, people disappear rapidly, and again, bright lights in big cities. So there is a big fundamental problem there. So we think, on our side, we think that the UK should have one immigration policy and not break it up piecemeal. If I can move on then. But we'll see, the proof, as we say in Scotland, is in the preening. So we'll see what this new relationship brings, if it does, if it is fruitful, and we can all be friends together, perhaps, between Westminster and Edinburgh. I certainly hope so. But again, as we say in Scotland, ahima doots. Madam Chairman, housing is worthy of debate entirely on its own. It's a sprawling subject, and we simply do not have the time to dwell on it here. But having touched on a lot of the difficulties, I would like to perhaps turn briefly to perhaps some of the solutions. If depopulation is one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse for rural Britain, then indifference is coming up on the rail. And that is something that we as politicians can tackle. We can, as we're doing today, raise these issues. We need to lift the profile of rural Britain. We can rail against the urban-centric policies of those who don't understand what rural life, with all its challenges and all its benefits, is truly about. We can fight, crucially, I think, most importantly, for the 3 Js. Jobs, jobs, jobs. Thank you.
3:28 and 3 more speakers. So you can do the maths on that. Joe Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'll be brief. I applied for this debate wanting to speak about not just my experiences, but the experiences of people that I grew up around, people that I was at school with, and the people who, in many cases, were forced to leave my constituency, the constituency of Hexham, a constituency that colleagues will be surprised to hear is the largest in England. And as the honourable member spoke about the beauty of his constituency, I feel compelled to remind people of the beauty of mine, the county of Hadrian's Wall, and to note that we'll be marking the anniversary of the loss of the Sycamore Gap tree during the conference recess in September. When I go through some of the towns and villages in my constituency, it's marked by exactly what members today have spoken about, a lack of younger people who have been forced, not chosen, to move away, forced by a lack of jobs, forced by a lack of opportunities to seek to make their life elsewhere, often leaving families behind, leaving caring responsibilities behind, that mean large amounts of travel back home to meet those caring obligations. It's something that the last government failed to grapple with. It's something that we know is a huge inherited generational and demographic challenge, and something that I believe and I urge our government to take up fully. But when I go through and I see some of those businesses, and I spoke to those businesses on the campaign trail that want to take on more people but simply cannot find the skills, cannot find those who want to work and who can afford to live in what is a overheated and overinflated housing market, and that leads to a decline in those businesses. It leads to a slow death for some of them. And one of my larger employers was saying to me during the election, if they take on someone and they train them up and they then can't afford to live in my constituency, they move somewhere else, they have then borne all the training costs for that individual, only to see them go and work in a far more urban part of the country, which is, we've spoken a lot about the rural premium, the rural cost of living. There's a rural cost of doing business as well. It's something that I think we should mark very, very carefully. But ultimately, for me, as the representative for the Hexham constituency, as the first Labour representative for that constituency, and as someone who was privileged to be out knocking on doors with my school friends, with my school teachers, it's something where we are letting not just our young people down, we're letting our older generations down. I'm privileged to go back to visit my grandma every week when I'm back in the constituency. I know friends now who live 3-4 hours away who are unable to do the same. And it is having a genuinely devastating impact on a lot of families, particularly with the acute social care crisis that this government has inherited. Ultimately, it's only by addressing this issue and addressing the really biting crisis of rural depopulation that we can turn our communities around and we can make sure that they can become the thriving engines of growth that this economy needs them to be. Thank you.
Yeah.
Arnold.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Thank you very much indeed for introducing this subject. It's a really important subject, and you consistently hit the nail on the head by introducing these subjects that really matter for us. Accommodation, of course, we've talked about. The Highland Council, where I was a councillor, has a £1.2 billion of borrowing. 40% of our housing budget is spent on interest payments. That is a catastrophic issue that we have got. Basically, we cannot borrow any more money to build more housing. I think it's very important the utilities which are building renewable energy projects across the whole of the Highlands need to build properties which will remain there for generations rather than modular housing for the extent of the jobs. And the same should go for the fish farm owners. And by the private and public communities working together, that would make a very big difference. I fear that the public sector housing is not going to be able to fill the gap. Scotland has got a £3.4 billion transport budget. It is not coming to the Highlands. It's been the A82 up Loch Lomond has to be one of the worst roads in the world. Trucks cannot get past there. Maui, the fish farm company, the BSW, the timber company, they just cannot operate safely, and it is extremely bad for the area. The railway from Glasgow to Mallaig, an average speed of just over 40 miles an hour. This HS2 thing is a joke. And of course, the ferries make Scotland the laughingstock. The Scottish Government has done no favours to the Highlands of Scotland as far as connectivity over the last 17 years. The same can be said for schools in the Highlands. Schools like Mallaig and Gairloch are less than 50% full. There's a complete collapse. As the numbers drop, we're losing the breadth of subjects taught by the teachers. So we're desperate for computing teachers, mathematics teaching, engineering teachers, and they are the jobs of the future. The attainment gap in Scotland is a great shame for our country. And again, the Scottish Government have been catastrophic in their management of our educational system. Broadband in Scotland is 96.8%. In the Highlands, it's 86.6%. So what is that? Almost 15% disparity. Of course, we cannot have the jobs of the future if we don't have the connectivity that way. You lose your population if your public sector is pulling out, and that is what we are seeing. There has been 8 care homes closed in the Highlands in the 2 years I was a Highland councillor. People are getting shipped from the west coast of Skye up to Thurso or Inverness. There is a collapse in the care home sector. The care workers are getting paid £12 an hour. That is less than they would get in the hospitality sector. That £12 an hour is an increase from what it was before April. So no wonder we have got an absolute catastrophe in our care sector. Of course, we all know that dentists, or the availability of dentists in the Highlands, is a disaster. We've been hearing about the importance of allowing immigrants to come to Scotland. We're losing over 50% of our young. They choose not to work in the Highlands. They want to leave home. We need to keep these guys. We need to offer them well-paid jobs, good accommodation, and cherish them. Otherwise, they will leave. And at the moment, they cannot get accommodation, and they are not being taught for the jobs of the future. So I think we are not helped by the Scottish Government, and we've all got a big job to do together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms Vaz, and for this unexpected pleasure of contributing to this very important debate. I should like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Nalhinin for bringing this very important debate to the Chamber. I thought I'd offer a Welsh perspective to ensure that all nations of these islands are spoken about in this debate. But I fear that much of what we already heard rings true in Wales. I represent Ceredigion Preseli. At the last census, Ceredigion, the majority of my constituency, recorded a 5.9% decrease in its overall population, and the communities that I now represent in Preseli or in Pembrokeshire saw their population flatline. And so this is a problem that we are very much living today. And what does it mean in practice? It means that we're having very difficult discussions about the provision of public services, for example, whether or not the school estate is sustainable for the future. We're talking about the lack of GPs, the fact that you don't have an NHS dentist anymore in much of the constituency that I represent. My honourable friend from Strangford mentioned bank closures. I shan't name them now, Ms Vaz, but there are 3 very well-known banks in the UK that no longer have a single branch in the 2 counties that I represent. This is the real consequence of depopulation, and I'd very much like to align myself with the comments made by all colleagues in terms of what needs to happen to try to reverse this trend. I would add, however, a Labour predecessor of mine, what was then the constituency of Cardiganshire, the great and late, sadly, Lord Liston Morgan, in his maiden speech, talked about how the out-migration of young people sapped the vitality of rural communities. Now, he was speaking in the 1960s, but I fear it's true today as it was then. And as well as sapping the vitality in terms of private enterprise, and also by having a detrimental impact on the provision of staff for key public services, this out-migration is also sapping and undermining the viability of our rural communities. And I think it is something that the UK government can help. I think it is something that should be on the radar. And perhaps when the Cabinet Office looks at the whole range of risks that they must monitor as part of their remit, something the Public Accounts Committee in the last Parliament spoke about, they should also perhaps look to see about how these discrepancies in demographic trends across these islands might have an impact on key public services. Because we will see, I'm afraid, in certain areas of rural Wales, the complete collapse of public services. And that will have then a knock-on impact on the more urban areas, which themselves are struggling with different demographic pressures. So I think it's very important that we have this debate today. And the one thing I'd perhaps ask the Home Office Minister to consider as part of her very important work now in this new Parliament, the lessons that could be drawn from experiences elsewhere across the world. My honourable friend from Perthshire mentioned the experience of Quebec. As a West Walian, when we turn on the radio, we often hear adverts from the government of Western Australia, attracting many of our young doctors and nurses to migrate to that part of the world. Are there things here with immigration, incentives, that we could try to attract more of our young people either to stay or indeed attract them from other parts of the world? There are many benefits to rural living, as all members have outlined today, but perhaps we could be a little bit more creative in grasping this problem by the scruff of the neck, because I fear we don't have much time left to deal with it. Thank you.
Well done, Ben.
Lib Dem spokesperson, Jamie Stone.
Thank you very much indeed. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Madam Chair. And can I congratulate my neighbour across the Minch on bringing this very, very important subject to the attention of this place. I'm old enough to remember when I was at school in Tain, my father saying to me, your future will lie in the south. Go south, young man or young boy, because that's where the jobs are. And then, as my right honourable friend, the member for Auckland Shetland, said so wisely at the beginning of this debate, then the oil came. And come it did. So in my own case, it meant that I worked in the Nig Yard, as so many other people did. At the height of the employment there were 5,000 people. That meant that I married and brought up my children in my hometown of Tain. I was one of the lucky ones. And you could say that in Caithness, the advent of Doonray was equally important in not just halting, but reversing depopulation. Because it can be said that Doonray, even today, keeps the lights on in Strathalladale and Betty Hill, because many people have a croft, but they also have an income at Doonray. So, to be quite plain with all colleagues, I'm coming from the issue of employment, above all else, high-quality employment. As my neighbour has just said, the member for Skye, Inverness and Wester Ross, South Wester Ross, it is crucial, because without the jobs, the depopulation will continue. I absolutely congratulate all the speakers. I think all the important points have been touched on. I think that what is very important is the point going back to my neighbour across the Minch. He said that there is a perception that the Highlands and Islands, or indeed many parts of the UK, are full up. That is absolutely not the case. You only have to travel on what we call the Cassie Mire or the Causeway Mire across Caithness, from Latheron to Thurso, to see the myriad of empty and ruinous croft houses either side of the road. These once upon a time supported families, but that's not the case now. So it'll be just exactly the same across the Minch. My neighbour, the honourable member for Inverness, Skye and West Ross-shire, mentioned schools. And just further north of his constituency, We have a problem with the retention and recruitment of staff for some of our secondary schools and our primary schools. And this is becoming a very, very big issue. And these sort of problems amount to a disincentive in terms of encouraging people to come to Highlands, or indeed potential employers to move to the Highlands and offer employment. And I'm very taken what my Welsh friend has said about Western Australia. If incentives can be put together that will encourage qualified staff, dentists, doctors, teachers, to come to these areas, and that would help so much. And again, going back to the honourable member for across the Minch, the fact is that there is a carers crisis. We see this in West Sutherland. We have an ever-dropping number of carers. And you ask yourself, who is going to look after the old people? People are giving up. Now, what I do believe the government can do is tweak the rules governing the mileage payments or the taxation on mileage that carers are presently rather burdened with. And it's a very, very, very big disincentive indeed. The honourable member for Perth and Kinrossha talked about the loss of the migrant workers, as did our friend from Hexham. The fact that we don't have these people, they've gone, is a huge difference. And, you know, I can remember Polish people saying to me in Easter Ross, do they hate us? Why do they want us to leave? And that was very sad. And also when I travel in Wester Ross and in West Sutherland, and you see the old European signs with the stars on it and said, this stretch of road was paid for with the help of the EC money. That was a huge loss to us all. And whatever you may think of the EC, the structural funding, or something historically like Objective 1, which was designed to reach into some of the most disadvantaged areas, including those that were faced with depopulation, that was a great, great loss to us all. So I do hope that His Majesty's government will look at these issues. I think time is short. It is a massive problem. It matters hugely to my constituents. I could talk about health, which has been mentioned already in this debate. The very fact that Caithness mothers have to travel an over 200-mile return trip to give birth in Inverness is a piece of nonsense. And that's one of the reasons that people are leaving Caithness and heading south. It's as simple as that. So I conclude with this. I think that good government treats the different parts of the UK, whether they be remote or depopulated, or the central bits, or what our good friend from Strangford, who's left us now, referred to as the concrete of London. The point is that a good and fair government will give these people an equal chance in life to prosper and to do well. So it's not all doom and gloom, as the gentleman opposite me said. There are hopes for the future. We could be looking at other models of recruitment. We could be looking at imaginative ways of achieving housing. We could be looking at incentives to get employers to come to these remote areas. And what I very much hope, Madam Chair, is that this will be the start of a constructive dialogue with the government, and indeed, I might add, between the Scottish government and the UK government, as to how we can actually, as has been said, grip this issue and shake it out and sort it once and for all.
Shadow Minister Matt Vickers.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Ms Vaz. I congratulate the honourable member for Nahale Anananya on securing this important debate, and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to respond on behalf of the opposition. The member told us about his deeply rural and very special part of the world and the unique challenges that it faces in terms of childcare and labour shortage. I echo honourable and right honourable members' comments highlighting just how important our countryside is to the United Kingdom. We heard about the challenges of ensuring young people are not forced out, but can afford to live locally with access to jobs and housing. We heard about the challenges of access to schools, to doctors, to banks and other public services when there is no longer a critical mass. Not only does the countryside make up 90% of the UK's land, as well as being home to millions of people, it contributes over 270 billion to our economy in England alone. As many speakers have observed, our labour market in rural areas has for a long time been constrained by a lack of supply, particularly with regards to certain skills. The supply of financial capital has also been limited by the structure and regulation of financial services. Historically, poor connectivity, both physical transport links and digital infrastructure, have added to the challenges in rural areas. That's why the last government made it their core mission to level up parts of our country that had traditionally been overlooked, and I was proud to support the previous administration's investment in rural communities. In government, we introduced local skills improvement plans and a new local skills improvement fund to counter rural depopulation. We delivered the £3.6 billion Towns Fund, boosting investment to create jobs and opportunities across the country and grow the economy. And we committed £110 million in extra investment to rural areas as part of the Rural England Prosperity Fund to create jobs across the country. We invested in rural economies by helping farmers with an investment of £2.4 billion a year, whilst EU land-based subsidies were phased out and new schemes were introduced that aim to work for farmers, food producers and the environment. The Farming Investment Fund will help improve productivity and efficiency within farming businesses, animal health and welfare in the years to come, as well as bringing forward more environmental benefits. As well as supporting farmers, ensuring we have access to training to meet the needs of local communities and backing Britain's farmers, there are challenges to living in rural areas that the last government made progress in tackling. I represent some of the most beautiful rural communities in the country, not quite so deeply rural as others, so I know the challenges of poor broadband connections, limited public transport and rural crime only too well. Poor broadband connections create huge challenges for youngsters in education. They impede rural businesses and put blocks on remote working. There's a long way to go on broadband rollout, but we're making huge progress. The last government invested £5 billion to roll out, and it's expected that by 2025, 85% of homes will have high-speed gigabit broadband. Another huge concern for those I represent in rural communities is public services, and particularly public transport and bus services. Limited services prevent youngsters getting to school, adults getting to work, and elderly people from accessing health services and social activities. The obstacle to commercially sustainable services in some of these communities is obvious, but we cannot leave rural communities cut off and isolated. There's much more to do, but the last government put forward an additional £150 million to local authorities to help them introduce new routes to unconnected areas or introduce demand response transport services like my local Teesflex service. And we established a new national rural crime unit, delivering our plan to crack down on crime and make our rural communities safe. So yes, the previous government was investing in and making progress in tackling the concerns and challenges facing many rural communities, but there's a lot more to do. I hope the new administration will continue to look at how we support those communities, maintain investment, mitigate challenges and spread opportunities. But the signs so far are not promising. Under the previous Labour government, rural unemployment doubled in the last year of their administration. At this general election, Labour's manifesto barely mentioned rural communities. And barely 2 months into this new administration, we hear that Labour are looking to claw back £100 million from the farming budget. Given today is Back British Farming Day, will the Minister provide some clarity on the government's intention for the farming budget? Where the government can make a substantial difference to our rural communities is through protecting their distinct way of life. In light of recent proposals to change house building targets, will the Minister clarify how the government will listen to rural communities with their new planning framework so that they have a say in the future of their community? There's much more still to do to support our rural communities. It's vital the new government continues to work quickly to build on the work of the previous government and develop a vision for the countryside to spread opportunities to all areas of the United Kingdom. Thank you.
Minister Seaman.
Thank you, Ms Vads. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today, and I would like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Nahelan and Iar, on his successful securing of this debate. And I'm extremely grateful to him and to all honourable members and honourable friends for taking part in this debate, and to mention those who have made very substantial contributions, the Right Honourable members and friends for Orkney and Shetland, Perth and Kinrossshire, Morecambe and Lunesdale, Strangford, Dumfries and Galloway, Hexham, Inverness, Skye and West Rossshire, Ceredigion, Preseli and Caithness, Sunderland and East Ross. I acknowledge also the contributions from the opposition leads as well, including the Honourable Member for Stockton West. I do want to address many of the issues raised in the debate today, which has focused on a range of key themes and I think has brought together the challenges of depopulation and its consequences in a very, very important and effective way. And I am heartened by my honourable friend also saying that he recognises this as an issue that goes way beyond the Home Office and that he is planning to raise a number of the challenges with other departments, and I would encourage him to do so. The government recognises the importance of this debate and indeed the challenges faced by rural and island communities in Scotland as well as Northern Ireland and more widely across the United Kingdom, in Wales and in England, and particularly when it's coming now to workforces and to supporting local and national economies and encouraging young people to feel that they have opportunity in the areas in which they have grown up. And there are a range of issues that were raised, including what we're seeing in some of the generational shifts that are having impacts now for families as well, which I think have been extremely well made and are important points for community cohesion and also for wider integration and continued success of local services, with the challenges in recruitment across primary local sectors, but also public services and the running of our local communities. We also, and I want to make this point, and one of the points that was raised in relation to the fishing industry and the fish processing industry, which I know is of concern to many colleagues in Scotland too. Recognising the contribution of the fishing and seafood processing industry and the contribution that makes to the lifeblood of our nation, including our coastal and rural communities, also generating almost £2 billion in exports as well. And we recognise the challenges that are faced in terms of recruiting domestically. These and other valuable jobs are often done in very difficult circumstances. And there has also been, as I think has been discussed today, a reliance on migration over recent years. Now, migration in response to... I will give way very briefly.
Thank you for giving way. Under the last Conservative government, too often we saw rampant exploitation of migrant workers in the seasonal worker scheme. Does the Minister share my concerns about this kind of labour exploitation, and will she work with me on novel ideas to tackle it?
I do thank my honourable friend for that point, and indeed it's a very serious point, one in which I will also be drawing on in my remarks, and of course we'll continue to work with him and others on how we tackle that very serious issue. But on the point also of migration, it has been an important part of the history of our nation. And this point was raised by the Honourable Member for Perth and Kinrossshire. But he will know, as I do, that for generations people have travelled here from all over the world, contributing to our economy, studying our universities, working our public services, and being part of our communities and how we have built our nation together. But I think we are all here alive to the demographic challenges that remote communities particularly are facing. And we are also committed to making sure that the immigration system works in the interests of the whole of the UK. If I could continue with my remarks. But we have also seen net migration treble in 5 years, driven largely by a big increase in overseas recruitment. And we are clear that net migration must come down, and the immigration system does need to be properly controlled and managed. And I make this point because it's for that reason we are setting out a new approach that is integral to tackling some of the challenges outlined here today, linking migration policy and visa controls to skills and labour market policy so that immigration is not used as an alternative to training or tackling workforce problems in the UK. I do have to make my remarks, and the honourable members have spoken. I will come back if I do have time. On this vision and on developing more sustainable alternatives to labour market issues, I'm sure that we are all keen to work together. There is no other way. And that's why I have also asked my officials to be working closely with Seafish, with the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and across government to address issues facing the sector and our rural communities, and to make sure that we're building together towards a more sustainable workforce and more sustainable communities. I will very briefly give way.
To your position, and I apologise for not doing so earlier, and I wish you well in the job that you now do. The Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland, myself, have pursued the issue of visas for fishermen across the sea coming to Northern Ireland, to my village of Portabogie, Kilkeel or Glass as examples, and Honourable Member as well. Always along the line we've had all of these verbal commitments, but never seen the actions of making the visas more acceptable for skilled workers, so the small fishing villages like Portabogie, Glass and Kilkeel can survive, and the Honourable Member would wish to continue that if that's agreeable. Thank you.
Member for giving way. He indeed has been a long-standing campaign on these issues. I'm very happy to meet with him if he wishes on this as well. But I do want to make the important... I will come back to the right honourable gentleman. I do want to make this point as well, which is how important it is that we work closely across with Westminster and our devolved administrations. And indeed, this is part of a very important reset because it is important that we look at how we tackle these challenges together. Many of the issues that have been raised, and particularly in relation to Scotland, are matters for the Scottish Government and for local authorities in Scotland. But it is important that we look to how we work together across Westminster and Scottish Government to make sure that we do have shared projects that are a success. I will give way.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way, because I've said often enough that actually the medium to long-term structural problems within the catching sector for deckhands has to be solved by a better training programme to make sure that we recruit from our own fishing and coastal communities. Working together with the Scottish Government where that responsibility lies, in the meantime, bridging the gap by the availability of visas for incoming crew would seem to me the perfect way in which government here with government in Edinburgh could work together to provide the industry with what it needs.
I thank the right member for his intervention. Indeed, I will be coming on to some of those issues in my remarks as well. Let me just talk briefly about the regional visa schemes that have been alluded to, referred to today. This is a topic I'm aware the devolved government in Scotland retains a key interest, and on which the Migration Advisory Committee in 2022 suggested the government could explore further. And it is important to say that the MAC must hear the voices of our devolved administrations and across the country. The proposals also included measures to restrict migrants to certain areas where there is currently no legal basis to do so, even if we wanted to. But fundamentally, overseas recruits are also likely to be affected by the same factors that anyone else is affected by when it comes to making decisions about whether to move into or remain in remote parts of the country. That means there must be jobs available, offering sustainable salaries, attractive working conditions, but also making sure that you've got the affordable housing that's been talked about, the transport links, suitable local infrastructure, broadband, childcare, so many of those issues that are affecting people where they choose to settle and where they choose to make those communities their home. Now, addressing these concerns and making these challenging careers therefore more attractive has got to be a focus of the work to tackle depopulation. Otherwise, even migrants drawn to the UK to perform these roles can leave their jobs and the area as soon as a more favourable opportunity becomes available. And it has been some of the analysis of the fresh talent experience that has been part of the story. And it is important to learn lessons, both from what's happened in the UK. If the honourable gentleman will, he can come back later, but I do need to continue my remarks. I do need to continue my remarks on this because I do just want to make this point. that it is important for us to learn what's worked and what hasn't worked in the UK, as well as learning from abroad, as the honourable gentleman has said. Now, the arguments in favour of legislating to enable rural communities to recruit and retain international recruits more easily are well-intentioned. However, this could also risk placing international recruits in a particularly vulnerable position, especially at a time when we're looking to protect workers, as has been mentioned, against exploitative practices in the care sector, fishing sector and elsewhere in the economy. Schemes that have previously been suggested for devolved migration controls would restrict their movements and rights. But immigration is a national and not a local system. And whilst we do have roots and flexibilities in our immigration system, the solution to depopulation, as has been raised by, I think, in a very effective debate across the House, it's contributed to and needs, by a range of issues, and needs a much more integrated strategy across government and with devolved administrations. And that's why it is important that this is taken further. On housing, if I can make this important point, because it has been raised, the government has set out an overhaul of the planning system, and we have introduced new mandatory housing targets. We are looking at prioritising brownfield sites, and it is a key mission of ours to make sure that we build 1.5 million homes, affordable homes being much more available across the country, and that is essential for the kinds of reasons we've talked about in terms of stability for families, stability for our local economies. I will also just make a couple of final remarks. I did mention, Ms Vaz, about the need to have a coherent link between our labour market and migration. And since the new government came in, we have been working to establish a framework where the Migration Advisory Committee, Skills England, Industrial Strategy Council and Department for Work and Pensions will work together to address issues facing the UK labour market, including skills gaps, I will come back. I may answer his question in my next point. Pay conditions, economic activity and the role that migration can play to support that. But in order for us to deliver on the government's missions, we do need to tackle these challenges in all parts of the United Kingdom, and that these bodies must work closely with our devolved governments and our combined authorities and local governments to make sure that we do address and work together on these matters in due course. Very briefly.
She did go halfway in addressing the point I wanted to raise. Ms Vaz, the experience of Australia, for example, where they do have a federal system, I grant you, but they still operate a single immigration system. But what happens is the territories and the states of Australia, as it were, can nominate certain key critical shortage occupations to help encourage and boost more of that. So in her discussions with the devolved administrations, perhaps could she bear in mind the experience of Australia and see whether it is something we could bring into the UK system?
I thank the Honourable Member for his comments, and indeed I was very pleased to be able to visit Australia very briefly in May to be talking about work being done on skills there. And I think it will be helpful to him to also know that we have announced a new Council of Regions and Nations, and indeed starting the process of establishing local growth plans and encouraging local authorities as well to take on more devolved powers, and he may want to contribute to some of those discussions. Ms Vaz, I'm conscious I do not wish to test your patience, so I will just conclude in a... I will need to conclude in a couple of minutes. I will conclude in a couple of minutes. I just want to raise a couple of, just a point in relation to the English language as was discussed, because the English language requirement is fundamental to successful integration into British society and in helping visa holders to access services, participate in community life and work. And workers who do not have a good command of English are also more likely to be more vulnerable to exploitation and less able to understand their rights. The level we have set is B1 from the Common European Framework of References for Language for Lower Intermediate English, and it's much more of a functional understanding. But I will make a remark in response to what has been raised in the debate, that there are gaps, and we do have more to do than what was inherited. We do also know that there are many ways in which the previous government's levelling up agenda on a more broader point of depopulation didn't integrate and didn't have a strategy for how all of these issues are tackled together. And that's why the work we're doing on devolution and working across the country is an important part of how we move forward. So in closing, I thank my honourable friend again for securing this debate. I have heard the points that he and other members have made, and I am grateful for them. And as I made clear, the government will work to continue to understand the issues they face in greater detail and how best that we collectively work to address this. And on the specific issues of related to immigration, we must and we will remain open to international skills and talent. But immigration, I would suggest, is not the end solution to depopulation, and it also must not be used as an alternative to the very important job of tackling skills and labour market failures here in the UK, around which we have set up a new approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Talk or Crichton to wind up.
Thank you, Minister, Shadow Minister, Honourable and Right Honourable members who made contributions to this debate. It's not bad for a birthday party. Turned out to be quite well. I particularly welcome the Minister's suggestion there of a reset on thinking on immigration, on the hint she gave of a more integrated strategy across government with DEFRA, Seafish and the Home Office working together on these specific visa or fishing visa issues that we raised. And a suggestion about the Council of Nations and Regions and more devolved and sophisticated approaches to immigration. I realise, and what she says is true, that the problem of depopulation is, as the member from Dumfries and Galloway said, a multi-headed hydra, and responsibility for it does not lie at our door. But some of the solutions can come from this place and other governments and local authorities working together. Thank you all for the contributions, which I think were lyrically encapsulated by the member for Strangford, who spoke very movingly about the sense of place, the sense of belonging and the sense of community, which I think is what we all want to retain when we talk about depopulation. The member for Orkney and Shetland and the member for Morecambe and Lonsdale talked about this drift from villages into towns, and I do warn them from my own experience in the Hill and Near that it is then only one more step onto the ferry and onto the mainland and out of the constituency. And housing and jobs highlighted by the member for Dumfries and Galloway and the member for Hexham, my Westminster Hall tag team buddy, because we seem to be in every debate together. These are the solutions. No jobs, no people. No people, in my case, no language or culture or sense of belonging that we talked about. And the member for Dumfries and Galloway spoke about the necessity of how this is a multi-agency solution. And there is understandable tension between him and the member for Perth and North Perthshire, who brought a great deal of expertise and knowledge gleaned from his chairmanship of the Scottish Affairs Committee, which we should thank him for as it now passes on to another chair. There is understandable tension over that idea of a separate Scottish visa. I think the solution lies in an integrated visa and perhaps in more sophisticated, more regional and more local visa requirements. After all, my phone knows exactly where I am, my bank knows exactly where I am, my online shopping card knows where I am most of the time. Why couldn't the government know where skilled migrants work onshore and offshore most of the time as well? I think it will require local, national and regional solutions. It also requires a great deal of care and sensitivity because of what host communities feel about migrant communities and how we retain the traditional communities that were spoken about by the member for Caithness and Easter Ross and many others. In conclusion, thank you, Chairman, for your chairmanship, and the Minister and Shadow Minister for coming to respond, and for all the members who took part. And I hope we can move this debate on. Now we have it on the dashboard. As I said, we do face a depopulation crisis on the edge of Europe, but I think here, at the centre of power, the lights should be on the dashboard as well, and we should start addressing these issues now before they become structural problems that affect the entire economy. Thank you all.
The question is that this House has considered depopulation in rural areas. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.